Well, I would like to give the word, now thank you so much for this interesting intervention. I would like to give the word now to Amir Arjomand, who is one of the most learned historical sociologists in the world. Please, Said.
Understanding diversity is a far greater challenge to social sciences than making generalizations. Montesquieu, Weber, and in our generation, and Eisenstadt have tried to come to terms with it. Now, when axial civilizations modernize, to paraphrase Milton Singer, both reactive impulses to preserve their axial traditions and the innovative impulse to reform it are at work. To understand this process, we need to think not so much of instrumental and formal rationality, which would incidentally lead to the old German distinction of civilization as a kind of general, universal, techno-scientific thing, to culture as particular. Now, instead of going that route and focusing on instrumental and formal rationality, I think we should rather think of value rationalization. And I've argued that value rationalization is a process of harmonization of heterogeneous principles of order that's driven by the judgment of a meaningful consistency. By this, I mean to link Kant's concept of judgment with Weber's Sinn-Zusammenhang. Now, the challenge, however, is to specify the complex combination of logic, poetic judgment, and historical contingency in this architectonic process of construction of meaning. The one thing that's clear is that we have to discard Elias's notion of the civilizing process and to replace it by culturally specific developmental patterns in different civilizations. Here, two developmental patterns in the growth of Islam as a world religion stand out, and they are, of course, intertwined with modernization and globalization. The first is one of geographical expansion of Islam along its frontiers in Eurasia and Africa. The second of intensive penetration of Muslim societies. Now, the interaction between these Islamic developmental patterns and modernization and globalization generates a number of processes, including fundamentalism, some of which are not civilizing in Elias's terms of removal and centralization of violence, and can indeed be properly called uncivilized from an evaluative point of view. Now, Iran's, just to give an example, Iran's past and current presidents embody two opposite Islamic modernities, what we may call the reformist and the Jacobin, following Eisenstadt's insistence that we don't ignore the Jacobin variant. The former president, Mohammad Khatami's reformism and proposed dialogue of civilizations have, as you know, proved a political failure. But we cannot assume that the current President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's rigid Islamic Jacobinism will succeed either. We do know, however, that he fits the pattern. And what fits the pattern, Jacobin pattern of modernity, even better than Ahmadinejad is the globalization of political violence in Islamic terrorism. Now, this is going back to the remark of Professor Eisenstadt about the different interpretations of modernity. I think this last phenomenon is particularly interesting for showing that there can be clashes of civilizational elements within each and every world civilization and within Eisenstadt's civilization of modernity. If I do have 1 minute, I will add a reflection on another point made earlier about this, the novelty of competing universalisms. I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. You do see it. Incidentally, with reference to the globalization literature, that kind of misleadingly passes as glocal, because I think that's not certainly glocal. It is a civilizational phenomenon, and it's a counterclaim to universalism. Now, in the case of Islam, you really have two forms of it. One is what I call a defensive counter-universalism, And here you do have things like Islamic human rights, Islamic science, or cloning of the UN organizations in Islamic conference and so forth. Here I think it's clearly a defensive reactive form. The opposite tendency is what's often called Islamic Reformation. Just to take one quick example, work of Abdul Karim Soroush, who's gone so far as to say that human rights are no more Islamic. You can not have Islamic human rights any more than you can have Islamic water, and then goes on and kind of pluralizes this key Quranic term, the straight path, of course, referring to Islam as the only way to salvation, by using it in the plural to kind of in advocacy of religious pluralism. We don't know which of these groups will win, probably neither, but there will be kind of in the long historical term a kind of a lot of back and forths. But in the end, I think something will happen, and a kind of a civilization will, if you like, modernize itself. But still, I think a lot of conceptual work needs to be done to see how this precisely articulates with the idea of a composite civilization of modernity, which I think has been under-celebrated in this gathering, I think, but I think we should not forget it as another key concept of Professor Eisenstadt's. Thank you.